What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. Okay, so we are doing Daredevil for all new, all different Marvel. A lot of you guys have asked for it, and I was like, well, I mean, why not? Why not cover Daredevil? A lot of people have been asking for Daredevil, and so I was like, well, we'll go ahead and throw it out there. I mean, just a cool story to tell, and it's actually really enjoyable. Like, Daredevil's actually pretty solid. Now, this run of Daredevil and all new, all different Marvel is written by Charles Soule, and there's a reason why that is important, and we'll get to that here in a second. But with regards to the way this story initially picks up, this is kind of Charles Soule, showing us what Daredevil's all about. Because remember, this is all new, all different Marvel. It was designed to be a jumping off point for people who wanted to get into Marvel Comics, especially those coming out of the popularity of the Daredevil Netflix series. Now, what we really do here is we basically just pick up with a kid named Billy Lee, who's essentially just been thrown off of a bridge. Now, we don't exactly know why. All we know is that there are a handful of guys that seem to have thrown him off, and they're associated with a gang known as the Tenfingers. Now, this is actually a really cool concept by Charles Soule, and I really love what he's doing here. It's one of these things where it's kind of a slow build, and things are a little strange for the first couple issues, but then when you get to issue number 3, it's just like, wow, like it really just kind of gets super cool, at least for fans of Daredevil, especially those coming out of the Netflix series. But again, with Matt Murdock jumping into the water, going to save Billy Lee, again, it's really just kind of Charles Soule saying, here's the whole idea with Daredevil. Because of the fact that he's blind, he basically has enhanced senses that kind of came by way of the whole incident that made him blind, his echolocation, for lack of a better word, different things like that. But the issue is that water's kind of his weakness to a degree, in the sense that because of the fact that sound seems to move through water so effortlessly that it's really just Daredevil being bombarded with sounds from everything, objects moving in the water, the sound of the water itself, so on and so forth. But eventually he's able to track down the body of Bobby Lee and, finally bring him back to the surface. Of course, Bobby Lee surviving. But the other half of this is that these guys who were working on behalf of Tenfingers were just kind of debating this whole thing, saying, hey, look, if we're going to go back and tell Tenfingers that Bobby Lee's dead and Daredevil went with him, we have to make sure, we have to know that they're actually dead. And so it's really just them just kind of hanging there. They're just sort of hanging out. Because, you got to remember, being thrown in the Hudson River, it's this whole idea that very few people ever do that and then survive the experience. Not to mention, most everybody who looks at Daredevil, sees him as just like a normal guy, like a mortal guy. They may not know the intricacies of his powers or how they work, but most everybody knows that he's just kind of a mortal guy. And so when people look at this, they're like, hey, look, it's just like a normal street level superhero jumping into the Hudson River to save a guy who's probably going to die. The assumption is that if they wait long enough, the situation will play itself out, in the sense that if they do not emerge from the water after a certain amount of time, well, then of course they're dead. And of course, that's the failing on behalf of these guys from the Tenfingers, because, once they say, well, it's been 10 minutes or however long, like these guys are gone, they're basically dead. Once they start heading back, of course, they're all ambushed by Daredevil. And again, this is just kind of Charles Soule giving us a feel for his character, his ability to sense body heat, different things like that, taking these guys out, the various forms of training he's experienced over the course of his life. But we also have the arrival of someone by the name of Blindspot. And Blindspot being here is actually really, really cool. As far as I'm aware, this is a new introduction by Charles Soule. I've done some poking around, and as far as I know, Blindspot's never existed in Marvel Comics, but it's cool to see this because of the fact that Blindspot's a guy that can make himself invisible. And so it's just kind of like help coming out of nowhere. And Daredevil's just kind of like, this is interesting, but I'll go ahead and fight alongside him, But it's also Daredevil, because of the fact that he doesn't see with his eyes, he sees with his senses, knows exactly where Blindspot is, and this is kind of going back and forth in the sense that Daredevil has basically taken Blindspot on as a protege. Now, the cool thing about this is that Charles Soule does not really give us the backstory of Blindspot right off the bat. Instead, it's just kind of like this guy who's here that Daredevil has undertaken as a protege. But the cool thing about this is that Blindspot's still learning how to be effective. The reason for this is because of the fact that Blindspot's still relatively new, but as a hero that relies on invisibility, Blindspot has a tendency to kind of let that get the best of him, in the sense that it's like, well, they can't see, they can't hit me if they can't see me. It's like, well, what about those who can see you? What if you're fighting against someone that has the ability to see you because they have infrared or something along those lines? You have to fight as though the world can see you. You have to fight as though you're not invisible. That way, when you are invisible and you're going against someone that can see you, you can still hold your own. It's basically not using his invisibility as a crutch. And so what happens is we have Daredevil basically taking Bobby Lee back to his place of residence alongside Foggy Nelson. Now, this is where I want to get into a little bit of the things that led up to all new, all different Daredevil. So when Mark Waid ran the Daredevil title between 2011, or I guess wrote the the Daredevil title between 2011 and 2015. It was basically part of the lead up and during Marvel Now 1.0. Now, Marvel Now was basically just Marvel reinvigorating their series, right? I mean, DC launched the New 52, Marvel doesn't reboot. That's their claim to fame. They're like, we do not do what DC does because that's DC and we're not like them, right, wrong, or otherwise. That's basically how Marvel functions. Because of that, titles that were struggling were handed over to different creative teams. Now, I wouldn't say that Daredevil's titles were like struggling per se, but I would say that Daredevil was in need of a little bit of reinvigoration, a little bit of refreshment. But traditional Daredevil fans, that is to say those who latched on to Frank Miller's run and didn't want to see things change, they got really mad with regards to Mark Waid because of the fact that Mark Waid basically took Daredevil out of New York City, put him in San Francisco, had Daredevil's identity as Matt Murdock revealed to the world, faked Foggy Nelson's death, created a rift between the two of them. I mean, just shook things up by leaps and bounds. The problem with this is that by the time Mark Waid was into the second volume of his run with volume 4, Marvel launched Secret Wars, and so they canceled all their titles and they basically launched the Secret Wars event under Jonathan Hickman, and then eventually we saw All New All Different Marvel, which is where this picks up. And so what Charles Soule does is, by some circumstance that hasn't been explained, Matt Murdock is back in New York City. He and Foggy Nelson, basically still live together, although it seems like Foggy Nelson basically faking his death. That aspect is still intact, that he's living under the radar. But basically Matt Murdock, Daredevil, has also done something so that no one knows his identity except for Foggy Nelson. We don't know what he did. We don't know why the world's forgotten who he is. All we know is that the world's just forgotten who he is. And so what Charles Soule does is he kind of blends the lines here. Again, jump back and forth between Matt Murdock and Daredevil. And that was always an interesting aspect of his character, because when it comes to, superheroes that have dual identities, to quote Kill Bill, a staple of the superhero mythology is that there's a superhero and there's the alter ego. The alter ego only serves a purpose in so long that it gives us an idea of what the character's about, but it's not like a mainstay of their comics. For example, no one reads a Batman comic because they want to go see Bruce Wayne at a charity. It's like, yeah, guys, the whole story is just about Bruce Wayne not wanting to be at a charity, but having to be there. You wouldn't make it like a main thing, right? I mean, people read Batman comics because they want to see Batman aggressively incapacitate people with razor sharp batarangs. That's what they want to see when it comes to Batman. But we know that the Bruce Wayne persona is what he uses to function in his day-to-day life. With Matt Murdock, it's not necessarily the same way. Matt Murdock and Daredevil are two sides of the same coin. And even Matt Murdock here, when he's basically, a prosecutor as opposed to a defense attorney, allows him insight into some of the goings on, with regards to the crime in New York City that he normally wouldn't have been able to gain otherwise. Instead, he would just be a defense attorney by day, he would be a superhero by night. This kind of allows him to tap into that element a little bit more than he did before. Not only that, basically talking with Billy Lee. Billy Lee is essentially, a member of Tenfingers turned state's witness. That's what he is. He's basically here to testify against the Tenfingers. Now, this is when we switch over to Chinatown, and we learn that Tenfingers is essentially this cult. In the public eye, it basically masquerades as a church, but in reality, again, it's simply just a cult. Now, because of the fact that Charles Soule is able to, really just kind of made this up, it granted him free reign on how he gave this entire premise to us, and the way he does it is really cool. The organization is actually ran by a guy named Tenfingers, who literally has 10 fingers on each hand. But the way this group functions is that those individuals who move up in ranks are given additional fingers. Those individuals who move down in rank lose fingers. And so it's really kind of like this strange situation. But Tenfingers himself is very much a guy who sees himself as like a messiah, like he's saving people. He's saving the people in Chinatown. He's basically giving them a better life, one that they wouldn't have had. They would have been left in destitution and squalor. And this is kind of not really Charles Soule making like a commentary on society. It's him making a commentary on life within Marvel Comics whenever you live in New York. And what I mean here is that if you're like an average citizen living in New York City, you're not relying on Captain America to fix your problems for you. You're not relying on Iron Man. You're not relying on the Avengers or any of those guys. You're relying on the ground level superheroes. That was the whole basis behind Heroes for Hire. If you had a problem, you went and contacted Luke Cage and Danny Rand, and they helped to solve that problem for you. That was the basis behind Daredevil and even Spider-Man to a degree, although Spider-Man, because of his popularity, is a little more grandiose in terms of the kind of conflicts that he deals with. But with the character of Tenfingers, it's more or less Charles Soule saying that he's coming along in a city where people, look at superheroes and say, why don't they save us? And he's saying, well, I'll be the one to save you. And people are gladly, running off to this. The problem is Tenfingers considers Billy Lee to be somewhat of a loose end. And the idea seems to be to basically take him out, to remove him so that Billy Lee will not testify against Tenfingers. The reason why this is so important is because Tenfingers himself is trying to make his operation legitimate in the sense that he's actually applying to the federal government to be recognized as a church. And what this would do was grant him a lot of autonomy in terms of how he functions with regards to the law. It would allow him tax exempt status, and it would essentially mean that Tenfingers could literally turn his church or turn his cult into a money laundering scheme, and the government government can't touch him because he doesn't pay taxes. He doesn't have to account for the money that he makes. It's just money that he's making. He can do whatever he wants with it. And so because of that, this whole thing coincides with two things happening at the same time, where Tenfingers guys are basically infiltrating the courthouse where Matt Murdock's located at for the purpose of trying to take out Billy Lee. Matt Murdock is also meeting with the district attorney, who's talking to Matt Murdock about his career, saying, hey, look, and again, it's Charles Soule kind of reminding us of things here, but he's basically saying, hey, look, you operated in San Francisco for a while. After you lost your ability to practice law in New York, when you were disbarred in New York, basically, you return to New York. Somehow Matt Murdock, regained his ability to practice law in New York City. He's operating as a prosecutor. It's really the guy saying, hey, if you don't blow this case, you're going to go far, which of course is Charles Soule saying the case is going to get blown. And this is exactly what happens when Matt Murdock, goes back to Billy Lee and says, hey, look, are you ready to testify? Billy Lee says, I'm not testifying. I got a better offer. Essentially him losing, a few of his fingers, and this revelation that he has been reduced down. He's been removed lost his rank as a member of Tenfingers. Now, going back to Chinatown and with the Tenfingers gang itself, this is when we learned that this was not the plan. The plan was not to remove fingers. The plan was to kill Billy Lee. The problem is that some of Tenfingers guys basically said, hey, look, this is the issue that we face. When we got in there, the district attorney's office being there with police being everywhere, you wanting us to take out both Matt Murdock, the prosecutor, and Billy Lee, the witness, would have just drawn too much heat. Like, it would have just drawn way too much attention. We made an executive decision. We decided not to kill Billy Lee, to basically remove some of his fingers and send a message. Now, the funny thing about this is that Tenfingers responds by saying, hey, look, I applaud your all's initiative here, but orders are orders, and you did not do the job that I gave you. And so because of that, one of the guys here named Samuel, one that seemed to make the decision anyway, this turns out to really just be an instance where his loyalty was tested. That's really what this was. It was Tenfingers saying, hey, look, I gave you an assignment. Your assignment was to go kill Matt Murdock and kill Billy Lee. Yeah, sure, it doesn't really matter to me that they're not dead. The idea was to test your loyalty, to see whether or not your mother, who's one of my closest members, closest allies in terms of his higher ups, whether or not her statement of you being potentially one of my best agents was true. The problem with this is Tenfingers says, look, because Samuel, you could not follow simple orders, you do not have what it takes to be a member of the Tenfingers. You do not have what it takes to be an inside member of my group. And so he basically says you're going to remain on the outside. You're going to remain basically down with everybody else until you can prove yourself capable. Now from here, we continue to jump back to this training session with Blindspot and Daredevil. Remember, Blindspot's just kind of Daredevil's protege here, and it's Daredevil teaching him a lot of really cool things. But one of the funny situations in this is that Daredevil is teaching Blindspot what it means to be a superhero, what it means to use things to his advantage. And when he says, look, you cannot rely on your technology, or you can't rely on your ability to become invisible as a means to satisfy all your problems. Again, you have to fight like the world can see you. Blindspot's response is, well, Tony Stark uses armor and that works perfectly well for him. But then Matt Murdock counters with the truth. He says Tony Stark's armor is not the source of his abilities. It's his brain that makes him that way. He says, look, you could drop him off in the desert and he would fly out on a jet made of like cactus needles. It's basically just that Tony Stark can use his brain to engineer virtually anything he needs to get out of the situation. His brain is where all that comes from. He uses the suit of armor as a means to achieve his goals, but his brain is the reason why he always has different types of suits of armor. And so because of this, it's Daredevil basically saying, look, the fact that you can make yourself invisible is cool. The fact that you have the technology, the means, the ability to do this is cool, but you cannot use it as a crutch. You have to use it as a way to basically achieve your goals. Now, the other half of this is why it is that Blindspot is carrying out, this whole mission of being a superhero. And Blindspot basically says that as, someone who grew up in this part of New York, that every time he looked around, all he ever saw was other superheroes solving other problems, solving huge calamities. Yeah, there were a handful of superheroes here and there, but in the end, there was no one protecting his people. There was no one protecting, the neighbors around him. Instead, they had to rely on each other. They had to do the best they could. And because of that, he basically stepped up to become a superhero so that they would have someone looking out for them. This was especially so when it came to the legal system, and this really kind of hits hard with Matt Murdock when Blindspot says, when it came to the whole legal system, lawyers don't watch out for folks like him because they're poor. They can't afford the high-priced lawyers. They can't afford the super expensive ones that can get them out of anything. They get the public defenders. They get the guys that just don't want to be there. They have to just kind of work in the muck in order to get, move up in the world and become legit lawyers. And so because of this, it really kind of gives Matt Murdock this perspective of where Blindspot is coming from, that it's not like he's some trust fund kid that wants to play superhero for a day. He's actually got motivation, he's got drive, he's got ambition, he's got a real calling, a real purpose for being here. Now, at this point, we transition to Tenfingers himself, and what he says is, there are some of you here who have proved yourselves as being loyal. There are some of you here that have proved themselves as being capable members of my group, you know, specifically a guy by the name of One Hand and a guy by the name of Nunefingers. And what he says is, I'm going to give you a gift. I'm going to give you the gift of rising you through my ranks. The issue is that all of this is being witnessed by Matt Murdock and Blindspot. And as soon as Matt Murdock sees what it is that Tenfingers doing, he panics. He absolutely freaks. Now, the reason why Matt Murdock panics is because he's seen this power used before. He's seen these different magics and so on used before. And where he saw those magics used was by the Hand. And this is when he comes to the realization that Tenfingers stole power from the Hand and is now using it on its own. Well, the Hand just doesn't let that happen. You don't just go into the Hand's organization, steal magic from them, and then walk away. He's like, it's only a matter of time before they come for you. And what we don't need is the Hand in New York. This is a ninja clan of ruthless assassins. They will go into a building and they'll kill 100 people just to take care of one guy. Like, that's how ruthless they are. They'll kill anybody who gets in their way. The Hand will do whatever they need to do to achieve their goal. And he's like, you're sacrificing, like, there's so many innocent people that could get caught in harm's way here. Like, what in God, like, in what universe would anybody believe that it's okay to steal magic from the Hand? And so this is basically when Charles Soule kind of beefs things up a bit. And that's what I loved about this, because the Hand is just like this clandestine ninja organization. It's really cool to see them involved in this story because they're an intrinsic part of the Daredevil mythos. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the Hand are not strictly a Daredevil thing. I mean, Wolverine has had involvement in the Hand. I want to say Spider-Woman Jessica Drew was involved with the Hand. You've had Nick Fury fighting the Hand before. The Hand are like this organization that operates behind the scenes, influencing governments across the world. And they've been around for, you know, thousands of years. They've been around for quite some time. And so because of that, they're very shady, they're very dark, but they're also extremely deadly and dangerous. And that's what Daredevil tells, you know, Tenfingers. He's like, you got to get these guys out of here. Like, all these people who were here, every last one of them, you got to get them out because the Hand will kill them all just to get to you. And Tenfingers responds by saying, no. I have foreseen that they're all going to be safe. I have foreseen that everybody is going to survive this experience. No one is going to die. Now, this is kind of the funny thing here that Charles Soule seems to be, you know, toying with the line of like blind faith, you know, that it's like, well, I believe that it's going to happen. And so I'm going to have absolute faith. And to me, it was always kind of like, I mean, that whole faith thing, that's kind of cool, you know, and so on. It's like, I believe that my taxes will get taken care of, so I just won't file them. If it's meant to happen, then they will be filed by some mystical means. No, not really. Like, you kind of have to go do that on your own. And it's really this whole notion of like faith versus reality. And it's a really, really cool concept here because it's basically Daredevil saying, okay, fine, man, you can say that you have faith to get past this, but we're going to have to solve this problem on our own. We're going to have to deal with this. And that's kind of the cool thing. You know, it's like that whole religious analogy, you know, like, yeah, sure. You know, you can say that you have faith in God to get you through the day, but at the end of the day, I know you look both ways before you cross the street. Like, that's the cool situation here, is this Matt Murdock saying, we got to take this into our own hands. The Hand isn't just going to vanish, you know, because Tenfingers believes that they're going to be okay. Instead, like, Daredevil takes on the Hand. Now, this is dangerous. This is dangerous territory, because remember, the Hand and Daredevil have a very lengthy history. There are a lot of things that went on with their whole organization. Because of this, if Daredevil fights against the Hand, they will consider him an enemy. It doesn't mean that they'll consider him an enemy and they'll fight him right now. It means that, I mean, they've got bigger fish to fry. They're more worried about Tenfingers, but it means that they will say, well, where he was an enemy at one point and he really doesn't require our attention now, they'll say, now Daredevil is an enemy yet again in Hell's Kitchen. We will have to deal with him at some point along the line. Or if the Hand come knocking on the door of New York and they want to commit some scheme or engage in some act or something like that, they'll take no prisoners. They'll make no bones about killing Matt Murdock to get to where they need to go. And so because of this, where the Hand are essentially fought off, you know, where they're staved off by Matt Murdock at this point, it's really just them kind of looking at Daredevil and saying, okay, he's too much of a hassle to deal with right now. They basically take off. And of course, this is you know, a Tenfingers saying, see, I told you that I foresaw the Hand being defeated. I saw us all being saved. It's kind of funny because then we switch back over to Daredevil and Blindspot again. And this is Daredevil basically saying, hey man, we're in the big leagues now. Like, the Hand is not to be trifled with. The Hand is not a joke. If they are here in New York, then people will die. A lot of people will die if that's what it takes. You know, if Tenfingers decides to go on the run around New York City, the Hand will kill anybody they come across until they get to him. They'll kill thousands of people until they get to him. You know, and that's kind of the crazy thing, is we've never really seen it in the traditional sense, like the Avengers versus the Hand, but that's very much a possible story. Like, it's entirely possible that the Hand would show up in New York for any number of reasons, tracking down one particular person, and the Avengers, a full contingent of the Avengers, would have to face off against them. And it raises a good question, you know, when it comes to the hand, when they're using magics, when they're using sorcery, different things like that, how many members of the Avengers would stand a chance? We know the Hulk would do well, we know Thor would do well. Captain America, I'm not so sure. You know, Black Widow, definitely not. I mean, it'd be interesting to see, you know, how a lot of these heroes would stack up against the hand in an actual fight if the hand decided to invade New York City. But the fact remains here that this is when Blindspot's actually introduced to Night Nurse for the very first time. And that's actually kind of cool here. This is one of the things that I dig so much, because of course he's injured in the conflict, and he was like, well, I mean, you know, like I myself am basically not here legally, so I can't really go to a hospital. I just kind of have to hope it heals. And then Daredevil's like, hey man, go see Night Nurse. So that's kind of the cool thing about this is, historically speaking, Night Nurse was always a nurse that dealt with like the masks, is really what they call themselves. Now, when I say that, what I'm referring to are superheroes who don't want anyone to know their identities. And so they basically show up to go visit Night Nurse. She doesn't ask any questions. She operates on them, doesn't ask who they are. They don't have to reveal their masks, and their anonymity remains intact. They don't have to go to like an actual hospital, because an actual hospital may force them to remove their clothes or something like that, or they'll have to fill out paperwork, so on and so forth. But Night Nurse is basically a pro bono nurse who tends to, you know, various superheroes as they're going through and going through their day-to-day operations. And so it's really just a great opportunity for Charles Soule to kind of reinvigorate this whole thing, you know, to reinvigorate interest in this character of hers. And so because of this, what we do is we pick up with Matt Murdock as Daredevil, where he's basically continuing to try to build a case against Tenfingers. Now, of course, again, the reason why is because their state's witness basically defected. You know, he was like, hey, look, I'm not testifying against Tenfingers. No way that's going to happen. And so Matt Murdock basically kind of has to go back to the drawing board and start grabbing all these aspects of you know, really warfare in New York, or these gangs in New York, and just begin the process of building a case against Tenfingers. And so because of this, he basically goes out and he reaches out to Captain America, to Steve Rogers. Now, again, this is an aspect, this is really Steve Rogers' character before the events of Avengers Standoff. And so Steve Rogers has not been returned to his normal age. He's not become a Hydra agent in terms of the Cosmic Cube, changing reality and altering his history. None of that stuff's happened yet. Instead, this is still the same Steve Rogers that we saw during, like, you know, Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers leading into Secret Wars. The cool thing about this is that Steve Rogers, again, is not really active in terms of what he does as far as fighting, but he's kind of like, you know, kind of the liaison for S.H.I.E.L.D., but it's also him having all the experience that Steve Rogers always had in terms of combat. And so it's really the guy that Matt Murdock wants in his side for a couple reasons. One, because of the fact that Steve Rogers can help walk him through whenever he comes to like explosives, you know, any dangerous situation like that. But Steve Rogers can also keep an eye out. He knows how to keep himself in the shadows, knows how to keep himself hidden, let Daredevil know if anybody starts showing up. The reason for this is because he's basically tracing down these individuals as he's trying to locate bombs that have been made for the purpose of being planted, you know, throughout New York. Now from here, we pick up with Samuel again. And of course, Samuel returns back to the Church of the Gathering Hands, back to Tenfingers. And this is when we basically have this huge gathering, this massive congregation of people that have been brought before Tenfingers by his various forces for the purpose of showing, you know, him demonstrating his power, giving these people a reason to believe in him as their savior, you know, for the fact that he can basically, you know, keep them safe from the life that they lead. We also find out that, you know, Samuel's whole discussion with his mom is this notion that his mom's basically been elevated to one of the 8, which is one of the elite guard of Tenfingers. Basically her saying, I truly believe in Tenfingers' cause. I believe in what he's about. But this is when we also learn that Samuel is Blindspot, and he's basically infiltrating Tenfingers' organization for the purpose of trying to bring him down. Now this is cool because it's also him showing that he's learned the lessons of Matt Murdock. He's learned the lessons of what Matt Murdock has basically taught him in the sense of fighting like the world can see you. The problem with this is that he's fighting his mom. And so even if he is extremely capable now, even if he's a much better fighter than he used to be, killing off your mom is not something that most reasonable human beings could do without any measure of a struggle. And so what happens here is this really kind of banter between the two of them where he's trying to talk to her about how, hey, look, you know, Tenfingers is not what he claims to be. You know, he's not what he says he's about. At the same time, we have Matt Murdock getting into this building with this, you know, this bomb and a ticking timer. Because of the fact that Matt Murdock cannot see digital frequencies, can't see like digital numbers, he doesn't know how much time is left on this timer. You know, we know that there's 40 some odd seconds left, but he actually races off to find the guys who planted this bomb, who were taking the other bombs, and drags one of them back and says, disarm this. Now, of course, the guy disarms it for the sole purpose of making sure that he doesn't die. But with Steve Rogers being here as part of S.H.I.E.L.D., it allows for S.H.I.E.L.D. to basically get involved and take these guys to prison, as well as kind of bring their operation crashing down around them. But back at this whole gathering, you know, for Tenfingers, we basically find the arrival of a being who works on behalf of the Hand, really has kind of been created by the Hand. And that's one of the cool things here is that this is basically called the Fist. This is just a giant monster, really. And as far as I know, again, this is something that's relatively new. It may be that this is an older thing. In all honesty, I'm not super familiar familiar with Daredevil. I never really found him to be that interesting up until, you know, All New, All Different Marvel, to be quite frank. But it's also Daredevil, you know, once he arrives on the scene, telling us what it is that's going on in terms of this fist, you know, and saying that it basically requires the lives of like 100 members of the Hand in order to create this giant monster. And so it seems to be an amalgamation of life energies of these different members of the Hand being brought together and pushed into one member of the Hand, which kind of turns him into a grotesque being. Whatever the case may be, you know, it's got enhanced strength, speed, so on and so forth. But Daredevil facing off against this thing also shows Tenfingers for what he is, in the sense that he basically starts using all these people around there as human shields. He tells his 8 to basically get out of there and they'll start over somewhere else. He's basically a con man, is what he is. He stole magic from the Hand. He shows up in New York saying he's going to rescue people. They basically donate money to him. He applies for federal recognition as a church. And so he's literally just scamming people out of their money and then just running off with it. And he just, you know, he's one of these fly-by-night operations. He just goes from city to city, just performing the same con all the time. The issue with this is that getting back to Samuel, you know, getting back to Blindspot, facing off against his mom, this kind of coincides with this fight between the Fist and Daredevil. It's kind of a cool thing to see because it's really like this juxtaposition between the two of them in terms of how they fight, how they operate. You know, Samuel, of course, is very capable in his abilities going against his mom, but it's also Daredevil realizing that the Fist is not an object or not an organism that's easily defeated, that it's very difficult to take out. But in the end, he's successful in doing it because he says, look, the Fist isn't really alive. Like, it's not an actual living, breathing entity. Instead, it just kind of borderlines on dead and undead. And so it's essentially killing a zombie. And so Matt Murdock basically just kind of tears its head off. You know, what we also find out is that with Tenfingers essentially running out and, you know, going back to his office in order to gather everything, that he was basically tracked down by the Hand while the Fist was engaged in this fight. He was tracked down by the Hand and he was assassinated by them. And so what Charles Soule does is he leaves things pretty much open-ended in the sense that Samuel's mother turns against the other 2 members of the 8, kills them, and then tells her son, I am not your ally. Like, I am not your mother. I'm not your friend. Like, I am an enemy. I will let you go this one time, but from this point going forward, we will be enemies. Now, what Charles Soule does with this, I don't know. I don't know if the mother of Samuel is going to go on and join the Hand. I don't know if she's going to create some branch off organization or if she's just going to be a rogue coming into conflict with Daredevil, you know, time and time again. That's something we don't know, but it's basically the introduction of a new villain, and it's this possibility that something great may come out of it. But again, things just kind of wrap up in the sense that it's Daredevil and it's Blindspot having, you know, somewhat of a conversation between each other. The two of them coming to the realization that they are very similar in terms of how they function with regards to the fact that they both fight for something greater than themselves. But again, it's just kind of Charles Soule leaving things open-ended for the future of Daredevil's character. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you're new here to Comics Explained, make sure you hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.